The Dallas Stars have made some changes this offseason, including a new head coach. Dane Lewis of Locked On Stars is here to analyze the offseason, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all that and more on this episode of the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us today. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. When we talk Dallas Stars, it means Dane Lewis joins us. And Dane, it's been a little bit of a busy offseason in Big D, especially, well, let's start with the coaching change. Your thoughts on the direction the Stars decided to go?
Yeah, certainly has been a busy offseason here in Dallas. And like you said, one of the biggest storylines, certainly the coaching change for sure. I think a lot of people were expecting we would see a departure of Rick Bowness, who's now with the division rival Winnipeg Jets, which is an interesting storyline in its own right. But the Dallas Stars were the winners, if that's the word you want to use, of the Pete DeBoer sweepstakes, a guy that, has had quite a bit of success in the, his first seasons with his respective teams, whether that's the New Jersey Sharks and even making it to the conference finals in 2020, where the Golden Knights did lose to the Dallas Stars that season in the conference final, but still a pretty good place to be for a first-year head coach. So I know there's been a lot of mixed reviews to his arrival in Dallas, from myself included, just kind of a mixture of, okay, this guy has proven that he can be a winner and he can take his team to some pretty high heights, but there's also some moments with Pete DeBoer-led teams that leave a little bit to be desired. So it's just kind of a question of, are we going to see, yet another promising start from Pete DeBoer that ends in, a little bit of disaster, or are we going to see, him finally take that next step and win a Stanley Cup? And, the Dallas Stars, can they win their second Stanley Cup in franchise history for the first time since the late 90s? So there's a little bit more optimism now, I think. Now that he's been here for a little bit and we kind of know what the roster is going to look like more or less. So all in all, I think I'm pretty optimistic for this season under DeBoer's leadership. And I think the rest of the Dallas Stars community is as well.
What do you think it is that causes DeBoer to sort of get off track after a certain amount of time? Have you given it any thought or analysis thus far?
Yeah, I've tried to look into it a little bit and tried to pick the brains of some other hosts. I know I've talked with both, the Golden Knights guys and the Sharks guys here at Locked On to kind of see what their thoughts were on the hire. And I think it, may just be one of those things where I think he can have pretty decent control of a locker room and guys buy into the culture year one. And then maybe there's just not a whole lot of change or continuing to build on what's been established early on. And, based on his introductory press conference back in, I believe that was June or early July, I think that there's a desire to come in and work with this well-established veteran group that the Stars have with Joe Pavelski, who has a connection with DeBoer from San Jose, but even guys like Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, who have been around this league for quite some time now. I think he's excited to have a nice core of veterans that can be leaders for this team both on and off the ice. And I think the Stars front office were very particular on who they chose, and there are clearly a lot of good candidates out there for the head coaching position. And I want to trust that Jim Nill, the GM, had the best in mind for the Dallas Stars when he picked DeBoer. And I think that there are certainly some reasons to be excited as far as the offensive production we could see from this Stars team, and even on the defensive side of things. I think a guy like Miro Heiskanen could have a really fantastic season if things go according to plan.
Yeah, a lot of people optimistic about that possibility. Obviously, every team loses some players during the offseason. Which loss has you the most concerned?
I think the biggest one has to be John Klingberg, a guy that really ever since the trade deadline, and even before, back in, I remember even as early as November around Thanksgiving, there were rumors that he could be on his way out of Dallas. Just he wanted a bigger contract, his last opportunity to get a really massive deal as he's kind of hitting the age 30 mark. So a lot of rumors that the Stars weren't going to be giving him that huge contract and that he'd be on his way out, but that finally was the case. He goes off to Anaheim, and that's just a guy that's going to be difficult to replace, especially from an offensive standpoint. The Stars always seeming to be lacking on the offensive side of the ice. And Klingberg, even though he was a defenseman, always, was a consistent performer in the regular season with shots from the blue line, helping set up really nice scoring opportunities, and especially so in the postseason. A guy that seemed to always come up in big moments, whether it was 2019 hitting the game winner in round 1 against Nashville that ended the series, or even in the bubble in Edmonton in 2020. Klingberg was a really solid piece. So just going to be difficult to, move forward from missing a guy like that. Obviously, Miro Heiskanen is a very capable player in his own right, but do you look at the rest of that defensive core, and there's kind of a question mark of who's going to be the true number one guy for the Stars, which is going to be one of the better storylines to follow throughout training camp.
Before we get to training camp, obviously players need to sign their contracts. The Stars have 2 talented goaltenders, but what's the latest on the contract situation?
Yeah, it still seems to be a little bit of a holdout with Jake Ottinger and really promising forward Jason Robertson, Calder finalist a handful of seasons ago and a 40-goal scorer this past season. I think it's just one of those things from what I can gather, talking with other, Stars media members. It's just neither party for either players really seems to be in a huge rush before training camp, especially Jake Ottinger. I've seen a little bit more on him that there hasn't been a whole lot of talk between Ottinger's camp and the Stars camp this summer, but not a whole lot of reason to believe that really any team would go out and give an offer sheet. Both guys are restricted free agents. Just, the teams that are in really good positions for the playoff standings or a playoff push this season probably don't have the cap space to bring on a guy like that, either player. And then the teams that maybe will be missing out on the playoffs this season, just based on what we can expect from them, probably, wouldn't be able to land a player like Ottinger or Robertson, who seem to kind of be in a pretty hungry win now mode. And I think both of them have also been pleased with their time in Dallas, and nothing I've seen has indicated that they would want to leave Dallas. So I'm not necessarily panicking right now. And I think as we get closer to training camp, we'll finally start to hear a little bit more development. And I think both guys will end up getting signed, because I think both those players were a big reason on why Pete DeBoer wanted to come to Dallas. And, Joe Pavelski signed a 1-year extension in the middle of last season. And I think getting to play alongside a guy like Jason Robertson was probably a pretty big reason for that.
No question about that. Dane, you mentioned this is a veteran team, but give me the name of some younger Stars players that fans should be aware of as we head into training camp.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys to be on the lookout for, especially at training camp. I think this has the chance to be one of the more competitive camps we've seen for the Stars in recent years. Starting on the defensive side, one guy that I'm hoping can step up and maybe not fully take the place of Klingberg, just given his youth. I believe he's still 20 years old. Thomas Harley, I believe he was the Stars' first-round pick back in 2019. A guy that has a little bit of NHL experience under his belt now. I think he played 34 games for the team this past season. A guy that has a lot of upside and hopefully can maybe come along and play some minutes alongside Miro Heiskanen, or maybe a guy like Ryan Suter, Esa Lindell. He's going to be really exciting to follow this season, because I think he'll finally make that jump and be a full-time NHL player. But there's also a lot to like offensively. Tons of really talented forwards, whether it's guys that have been in the NHL before, like Ty Dellandrea or Riley Damiani, but even guys that are still, at the prospect level, whether it's Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven, Maverick Bourque. I think all three of those guys have an excellent opportunity to potentially crack the NHL roster. Bourque, obviously, the longer tenured of those three, having been drafted back in 2020. So I'm excited to really watch this young forward core compete, because I think I have a pretty solid top 6 and maybe even top 9 on the forward line, with that top line of Hintz, Pavelski, Robertson, and then Sagan, Ben. They're going to be somewhere in the lineup. Mason Marchment, who the Stars got from Florida this offseason, he's probably going to find himself somewhere in there. But there's a lot of spots up for grabs, and there's a ton of really talented young forwards in this organization. So I think it's going to bring out the best in all of them at training camp, and we're going to see a really competitive stretch during camp and during the preseason. And I think that by the end of it, we'll likely have a pretty good competitive good mix of young and old on the roster to start the season.
Well, lots to look forward to in Big D. Dane, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Certainly. You can find me on Twitter, just a simple @Dane_Lewis, and our shows just @Locked On Stars. And just like this show, we're on YouTube and available on just about any podcasting platform. Again, always free, just like Locked On NHL.
All right. Dane Lewis, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right, Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, like all Built bars, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. You get all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of having to make it, plus it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein. What's great about Built is that all their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Go to Built.com right now. Use promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com.